Hey, this is Jeff Hale. Welcome to Comprehensive Outdoors. This channel is made to help you become a more comprehensive hunter or fisher. And on this channel, we've talked about lingcod, we've talked about catching Chinook salmon, we've talked about fly fishing for trout. But just recently, I posted a video about a bass fishing trip. And what a lot of people don't realize is Western Washington has good largemouth bass fishing. Now, while the bass might not be as big as what you're going to catch in Florida, or even in Eastern Washington, they're pretty good. There's plenty of these lakes around here that have 2 to 3 pound bass, and every once in a while you'll hook something between 4 and 6 pounds. And as you saw in the introduction segment of this video, you got to see a lot of nice largemouth bass and smallmouth bass that were caught in Western Washington. A few of those bass were caught in Eastern Washington lakes, but the majority of them are here in Western Washington. So I'd like to talk to you about what I've found, and this is just me personally. There's lots of more experienced bass fishermen than me, but what has worked personally for me to catch bass in Western Washington lakes. Now, when I was a kid, I used to watch the Bassmaster shows, and I used to love the gear because bass fishing is gear heavy. And when we think of bass fishing, we think of throwing crankbaits and jerk baits and divers like this, right? This is the kind of stuff. We think of throwing rapalas or rapalas, however you learned how to pronounce it when you grew up, or big rubber frogs, right? Or the great big long 12-inch long worms that we used to rig up, either Texas style or a Carolina rig. Spinner baits, right? These are all the things we saw on TV growing up. And for a long time, when I would go out to these lakes, that's how I would fish. I'd fish a pretty heavy rod, 15-pound test line. I'm throwing big crankbaits, I'm throwing big jigging pigs, I'm throwing big spinner baits, and I wasn't having any luck. And then I learned about drop shotting, and I learned about finesse drop shotting. And that's when my bass game went to a whole new level, and I started hooking a lot of fish. And I have to give credit to Jim Corsetti and Gus Corsetti, because Gus especially, as a young kid, man, he's been into bass. He's signed up for, he gets those weekly envelopes from Bass Pro with a bunch of gear. That kid knows bass fishing, and he actually introduced his dad and me to these drop shotting techniques, and man, do they work. So when you're gonna do light line drop shotting, I would suggest that you go ultra light, and I suggest using a spinning rod. Now you can use a bait caster, but when you're casting baits this light and when you're using line that is this light, sometimes a bait casting rod's not the best. With this spinning rod, I have a lot of good control. I can flip it underneath docks. I can cast it right by something and then grab the line and stop it if I want. But this is an ultralight rod. This is a 6'6" rod rated for 2 to 6 pound test. And I have 6 pound on here, and it's 6 pound fluorocarbon, and I have it attached to just a barrel swivel. And this is the base of my setup. This is the foundation of everything I do light line bass fishing. Okay, your basic drop shot setup looks like this. This was my swivel from my line. It comes down to a hook. And notice how that hook is pointing up. That hook is attached to that line with a knot called a Palomar knot. We'll get to that in a minute. Then down here, I have a piece of lead. So on this particular drop shot rig, I have hooked on a little tiny robo worm, and I've hooked it just through the lip. And here's why drop shotting and ultralight finesse drop shotting particularly is so effective on these bass in Washington State. I've noticed that because the water's colder here in Washington State, and the bass just seem to be more picky and more finicky. Well, a drop shot is amazing because I can cast this whole rig into where a likely spot is that I think a bass is, and I don't even have to move the weight. I can just leave the weight there and take the tip of my rod and just do this and twitch it. And this thing will just sit there and twitch. And I might do that for a minute, and then I might drag it a couple feet and then do it again. Now, of course, we're not in the water right now, but what happens is that minnow just sits there and flicks and flicks and flicks and flicks. And pretty soon, a bass just can't stand it anymore and either gets irritated or wants to eat. It comes up, sucks all that water in, inhales that thing, and you got a fish on. In the old type of fishing, you're casting it out, you're retrieving it in. You're casting out your crankbait, you're reeling it in. You're casting out your worm, you're dragging it across the bottom. And it doesn't sit there very long. Those are great techniques for super aggressive bass. For these Western Washington bass, you want to fish this slow, and it might take you a full 8-10 minutes to fish out a whole cast. Cast it into where you think they are. You might drag it an inch and then flick it, flick it, flick it, flick it. And that thing just sits there and dances and wiggles. And after a while, with a bass sitting there, they can't take it anymore and they'll come hit it. So right now, it is May 27th. In Western Washington lakes, the temperature is about 62 to 65 degrees, and we call this pre-spawn. So right now, the bass are staging before they get on the beds to spawn, and that's a really good time to fish. Then I don't really like to mess with them when they're on their spawning beds, but post-spawn right afterward is also very good, and we do some great fishing in July and August. So this is a fishery you can do all summer long, regardless of if they close down salmon, regardless of if they close down halibut. You always have something you can go do, and it's fun, and bass fight like hell, especially on a light rod, and it's cool to catch them. They're really neat fish. Okay, how do we rig up the bottom part of a drop shot rig? Like I told you, I have my ultralight spinning rod, 6-pound test to my swivel. That's the base of everything I do. Now I'm going to attach a drop shot rig to that swivel, but first I'm going to build it. And let's talk about hooks. I prefer actual wide gape drop shot hooks with a straight eye. Here's another one. Especially if I'm drop shotting and using a bigger type of a bait like a Senko or a stick bait in 4, 5, or 6 inches long, these big wide gape hooks allow you to get purchase on that worm, yet there's still plenty of hook gape to get that bass when they eat it. And this is a 1/0. And for anybody who thinks a 1/0 is too big for bass, it's not. These things have huge mouths, and even the smallest bass can suck in a 6-inch Senko like it's nothing. It's amazing. So step 1, I take a piece of leader. Okay, it can be fluorocarbon or it can be monofilament. I'm using 6-pound main, and I'm going to use 6-pound leader. I take whatever hook I'm going to use. So how do I tie the Palomar knot to the hook to get that hook on my leader? I take my leader and I'm going to make a loop. See that loop? I'm going to take that loop and I'm going to pass it through the eye of this hook. All right, I took that loop and I put it through the eye of the hook. Now I'm going to take the doubled over loop parts and I'm going to tie an overhand knot like this. I have an overhand knot. Can you see that? Then I take this tag end, I open it up, and I put the hook through the loop. I lick everything, and I cinch it down. When you separate these two pieces of line, you have the hook tied in the middle. And what you want to make sure is that however you orient your leader, that hook should be facing up. There it's facing down. That's not how we want it. I don't want it like that. I want it like this. I want that hook facing up. So this part in my upper hand would go to my swivel, and this part down here goes to the sinker, okay, the drop shot weight. So now I attach the top part to my swivel using whatever knot you want. And if you're using fluorocarbon, make sure you use the correct knot. You can use Palomar knots to attach lures and hooks, and you can use the uni knot, which is a good knot for fluorocarbon to tie on, let's say, onto a swivel. The regular old clinch knot's not great with fluorocarbon. All right, so I have my swivel. I got my hook pointing up. See the hook pointing up? And then down here, I'm gonna put my drop shot weight. Now, this thing right here, you can buy them. They're called drop shot weights, and they have just a little metal clip, and you don't even have to tie them. You can just put your line through and pull it up and clip it on there, and that way if it gets caught in the rocks or the weeds, it'll just slip off, and you still keep your hook, and you still keep your soft plastic bait, and you just put on another weight. But I've seen people use split shot on the bottom. I've seen people use little bell sinkers. It doesn't matter, but what the most important thing you want to do is use the lightest weight possible you can get away with to get your gear on the bottom. The lightest weight possible. That's gonna make a difference. Let's say I wanna fish my Senko or my soft plastic pretty close to the bottom. I might cut off some of this line I'm gonna take my drop shot weight, slide it through there, pull it up, and bam, there's my rig. Here's my drop shot. Let's say I'm gonna fish a small finesse bait like this, and I'm just gonna nose hook it, just barely through the nose, and pull it down, and that thing will just sit there and swim back and forth, back and forth. Now let's talk about fishing it for a minute. When you fish a drop shot, remember I said use the lightest weight possible. The reason you want to do that is it helps you to detect bites. So I pitch my drop shot out, I let it sit, I get on a tight line, and I just slowly quiver the tip of my rod, and that soft plastic is out there dancing. Then maybe after 10 or 15 seconds, I slide it a couple feet, or I lift it and give it a hop, and then I sit there and I just shake it. I'm just shaking the tip of my rod, I'm not even moving it, and that soft plastic is just sitting there swimming. Then maybe I bump it a couple more feet, and then I shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it. Shake your lure, and shake, 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 shake. And you wanna shake it, but don't keep the line super tight. You wanna keep it on a medium slack line, and you wanna watch your line. Because when you get a strike, 9 times out of 10, you won't feel it. You will see the slack in your line. Like if the slack line's like this, you'll see the slack in your line go tight. As soon as you see that line go tight, you know that a bass has gone. That's how they feed. When they come up to a bait fish or something they want to eat, they inhale a massive amount of water out their gills, and they literally suck the water and the fish or the bait into their gills. And so throw it out, shake, 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 a little bit of slack. Shake, 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 a little bit of slack. Occasionally, the bass will just crush it and he'll be on, but most of the time, you're gonna see that slack line and it's gonna go tight. As soon as that happens, reel down and lift. And remember, you're only using 6-pound test, and this is a finesse technique, so you have to play these fish. This is not like you're using 20-pound test spider wire and you're ripping these big bass right out of the weeds. You have to play them. So we'll do another one on bass in a little bit, probably in a week or two, talking about the stick bait or the Senko, and how to rig this thing either Texas rig or wacky style. And this is probably the most deadly bait I have ever used. That's right, this thing right here, you can't believe it, but that's it. This outfishes everything else. So I hope that helped you. Give this a try. Go out to your local lake. Pretty much every other lake that you go to in Western Washington that has trout in it also has bass in it. On the very ends of the lakes, you'll see lily pads, you'll see sticks, you'll see docks, all that's prime bass habitat. Get yourself some small finesse plastic baits and go out and give it a try. I guarantee if you stick with it, you'll catch some nice fish. I hope this helped you. Have a great day. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and click the bell so that you can get notified when I post new content. All right, have a great day.